use the chat feature, and we will also take questions by video as well. But if you'll hold those until the end, we'll have a good amount of time for those questions. So let's go ahead and get started. As you all know, Virginia's Enterprise Zone program consists of 45 zones throughout the Commonwealth of Virginia, as far east as Accomack and Northampton, and as far west as Wise County. Here's a little snapshot of that grant year 2022 data that we have put together. We had $16.25 million in program funds this year. We were awarded 104 real property investment grants. Those grants came to a total of $9,357,734. And there was a total private investment, so that qualified real property investment amount was $466,494,655. We awarded 38 job creation grants for a total of over $1.795 million in awards. That was 142 total grants and over $11 million in total awards. This is a look at our annual timeline. As you all know, you have the end of the calendar year, and our program runs on calendar year, which is a little bit different than a lot of the other grant programs that the state has and the incentive programs as well. So in January through March, you have those applicants coming to you and coming to us, helping to determine whether they're going to be eligible for a grant that year. That's when you are marketing the program and trying to find those businesses who would be eligible for the program. Those applications are due on April 1st to DHCD, and we take April through June to review those applications. Those applications go through at least 2 different reviews and go through a lot of different people, and we give folks the chance to fix any kind of mistakes they might have or any information or documents they may have left off. So that's why we have that little chunk of time there to give enough time to go back and forth and get that information. On June 30th, the funds are dispersed via check to those businesses. And as you all know, on July 15th, the local annual reports are due. We have almost all of them. We're still getting in contact with a couple of folks to get those reports in, but we're in pretty good shape for that this year. And we are working now on our statewide annual report, which will take a lot of the information that you've provided in your annual reports, as well as information and data from that Enterprise Zone portal submission system to provide information to the General Assembly, including the 2 money committees, House Appropriations, and Senate Finance, to make decisions about the budget and how much they'll be funding our program for the upcoming year. In October, we will have renewal requests due. There are a good amount of localities this year who will be having renewal requests necessary to turn in, and we'll be having a training on that very soon. On November 1st is when those boundary and incentive amendments are due, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. We have made an updated amendment manual. It is kind of brand spanking new. It looks really different. It's updated. It looks more modern. There are pictures. You know, I love the pictures of all of the great projects that we funded in the last couple of years. And we're hoping that we made it easier for you all to read. It's not so much in narrative form with thick paragraphs. Things have been broken down into bullet points. We tried to just make it as easy to read as possible. So a locality may amend boundaries or local incentives once every 12 months from the date of the last amendment. If you happen to be in a joint zone locality, so for instance, if you are Prince Edward, Charlotte County, Lunenburg County, each locality that's in that joint zone may make an amendment every 12 months from the date of the last amendment. One thing that we're going to stress today is that it's very important that you come to us for approval before moving on at the local level. That will save you a lot of headaches and save a lot of time and extra work that could have to happen if you were to go forward at the local level without talking to us first and then maybe need to change something in the future. So you're going to be submitting that final amendment application via CAMS. And I know that Mandy is helping me by putting some good links in the chat to CAMS and the amendment manual where you can find those. Local annual reports must be current in order for us to approve an amendment application. And once we do approve an amendment, the modifications to the zone are retroactive back to January 1st of the calendar year in which the amendment was approved. So if you submit an amendment at the end of the year this year and we get that amendment approved, then the modifications will be retroactive to January 1st. So you might have a company that previously wasn't in the zone that you're adding to the zone, and they're planning to apply for the 2024 grant year. If you add them to the zone by the end of this year and it's approved by the end of this year, it'll be retroactive, and then they would be eligible for that enterprise zone grant for next year. Amendments are accepted on a rolling basis throughout the year, but in order to be considered for this current calendar year, you must have it submitted in CAMS by November 1st. So this is a reminder that a draft amendment application and maps showing the revisions must be submitted prior to that public hearing at the local level. That helps us just to identify any concerns we may have. We help you work through any issues you may have. We also can sit down with you virtually or in person and look at those maps with you and figure out if there are places where you can maybe remove some acreage that is currently not eligible for enterprise zone grants so that you can gain more acreage in order to have more eligibility in your locality. You can see that there's a checklist of required attachments. All of these are to be uploaded and attached in CAMS. So you're going to be submitting your 2 public hearing advertisements, your official public hearing minutes, your local assurances, your incentive chart, your maps, and your joint zone amendment agreement. So of course that incentive chart is only if you're having an incentive amendment. The maps are only for a boundary amendment, and that joint zone amendment agreement is only a requirement if you are in a joint zone. Here is a screenshot of where you can find that Enterprise Zone Amendment Manual. This is on the local zone administrators page. So on the Virginia Enterprise Zone page, if you scroll down to the bottom of that page, there is a link to the local zone administrators page, and that's where you can find this amendment manual. It used to be called the amendment application form, but it has been updated now and is the actual manual since we submit everything electronically in CAMS. So that first requirement, after you've worked with us and we've approved for you to move forward, your first requirement is that public hearing. Public hearings are a required component of all amendment applications, so that means boundary and incentive amendments. The local governing body must hold a public hearing on the proposed amendment or amendments prior to passing the resolution authorizing submission of the application. One question that I have been asked a lot is whether the public hearing and the actual Board of Supervisors or Town Council meeting for that resolution can be in the same night. And the answer to that is yes, it can be. We just ask that you obviously have the public hearing before that other meeting that you're approving the resolution in. The public hearing must not be held more than 6 months prior to the amendment application submission. And then there are certain advertising requirements that also must be met. These are the same advertising requirements that are requirements of any kind of public hearing that you may have. So it must be advertised once per week for 2 consecutive weeks. The final ad cannot be published less than 5 days or more than 21 days prior to the hearing. And of course, it must state the time, date, and location in the ad. The public hearing must be open to the public and allow time for comment. And you're also going to be submitting an official copy of those public hearing minutes, and that should include any of those comments that were heard during that public hearing. There is a note over here in blue. There's a really helpful timeline for this process in the amendment manual. It literally helps you to kind of step back and count how much time you need in order to meet these requirements of the advertising, meet the public hearing requirements and resolution requirements, etc. So for that resolution requirement, a resolution from the local governing body approving the amendment must be submitted with the application. So in terms of a joint zone, this is another question that we get a lot. Each locality in the joint zone is not required to pass and submit a resolution. Only the locality amending their portion of the zone must submit a resolution. And I use Prince Edward and Charlotte and Lunenburg a lot because that's where I used to work and that's where I still live. So if you're Prince Edward County and you're in that joint zone and you're submitting an amendment, you have to submit a resolution and you have to meet that requirement, but the other localities in your joint zone do not. They are going to be signing something called the Joint Zone Amendment Agreement, and we'll be going over that in an upcoming slide. Those resolutions should include the following information. They should include that the locality is applying for an enterprise zone amendment, that it authorizes the chief administrator of the locality acting as the LZA to submit all information needed to apply for a zone amendment, and that it authorizes the chief administrator to meet other administrative and reporting requirements throughout the life of the enterprise zone. And if there is no chief administrator for whatever reason at that time, then a clerk may also be authorized for those duties. We have a sample resolution in the amendment manual. You can literally plug in the information for your locality in that resolution and move forward that way. Local assurances. So this is a document that is used to authorize and certify the accuracy of the information provided by the applicant and to ensure that the program regulations of the Enterprise Zone program will be met. All applications must include a completed signed copy of this document. And there is an example of this document on the screen. It simply says that the person signing it, the chief administrator, is a representative of the local governing body. All of the information that's being provided is accurate to the best of their knowledge. It tells the date of when the public hearing was held and that any enterprise zone incentives proposed represent a firm commitment from the locality. And if at any time the locality is unable or unwilling to fulfill a commitment to provide those incentives, or those incentives have not been used within a 5-year period, then the zone shall be subject to termination. And so you'll have your chief administrator sign that and date it, and then that will be one of the documents that is uploaded into the CAMS submission system as well. Mandy?
Yeah, thanks, Kate. So also just before I get into the joint zone amendment agreement, I want to just let you all know in the chat box, I put a few links. We put the link to the CAMS portal, the link to the local zone administrators page, web page for that's the DHCD page. And then I also put a direct link for that PDF for the amendment manual, which can be found on the local zone administrators page. So continuing on with the amendment process, the joint zone amendment agreement, this is, if you take a look at it, while it looks very similar to the local assurances, it actually is for those joint zones. So going along with Kate's sample, Prince Edward County is the one that's submitting the amendment, then both Charlotte County and Lunenburg County will need to have a signed joint zone amendment agreement. And this is an administrative task handled by the I guess you would say not the clerk, but the head, the county administrator, city council, someone of that nature. Again, it's very similar. So it says you're in agreement with the amending jurisdiction to file that. The information in the application is accurate to the best of your knowledge. You're aware that a public hearing was held if you're that joint zone. And also, again, going back that if the locality is unable or unwilling to fulfill the commitment, then the zone shall be subject to termination. And again, the chief administrator can sign that. If you don't know. So just as a reminder, when you are looking at your boundary amendment size limits, you need to make sure to keep within the scope of that when you're doing additions and deletions. So of course, for counties, the minimum is 320 acres, but the maximum is 3,840 acres. And that does include the contiguous lines or connectors that you use for the various aspects, okay? The zone size limits for towns and cities, of course, is 160 acres, or the maximum is 640 acres. There is an exception that it could be if it's larger than 1 square mile, provided it does not exceed 7% of the locality's land area, or it does not encompass more than 7% of the locality's total population. That can be calculated using the Weldon Cooper Center's most recent final population estimates, and there is a link in this presentation to that. And then there are some special size limits for zones that are in counties, and those are listed over there on the left that include consolidated cities or counties, Chesapeake, Hampton, Newport News, and Virginia Beach, or those consolidated cities as Suffolk or Richmond. And so they need to use the minimum and maximum size guidelines for zones in unincorporated areas of counties as described above. So when you're working on your boundary amendments and you're adding that zone acreage, you may expand up to the maximum size that is outlined in the program regulations, which of course was that previous slide for your particular locality. You cannot do the boundary amendment for one single business firm. We also do not want to see a boundary amendment for less than 10 acres in size as far as adding that acreage. And if it's a joint zone, the portion of the zone in each locality must meet the minimum and maximum size requirements as outlined in the program regulations. So of course, that's always going to come up. Now, if you're going to be adding and deleting, let's say that you need to add, you need to delete some acreage in order to be able to add some acreage, or you're just cleaning up some of your boundaries based off of changes in zoning or other aspects, then you need to make sure you notify each property owner and business located within the proposed deletion, and that needs to happen at least 2 weeks prior to your public hearing. We do have some examples of letters that can be sent to property owners or the businesses located in the zone in that amendment manual. And if you are the local zone administrator, if you're making those deletions, you do need to demonstrate that that deletion does not have a negative impact on businesses and properties. So some examples of deletions may be that just for some reason residential properties were included in the very beginning of that zone. You also may want to just clean up some acreage. Maybe a line took a partial zone or a partial parcel in that aspect of it. Some other, or it could be public buildings. So such as like your county government complex or your schools, they are not eligible for the enterprise zone grant. So taking a look at what is there and what potential development is available is one of the things you want to look at when you're doing your boundary amendments. And of course, don't forget that if you are adding or removing non-contiguous areas, you have up to 3 that you can have. So each enterprise zone may have up to 3 non-contiguous areas, meaning they are not connected to one another. However, your total acreage of the combined zones cannot be greater than that maximum zone size as outlined in the regulations, which was those few slides before for your city or county. And each participating jurisdiction in a joint zone is allowed up to 3 non-contiguous areas. So going back to Kate's example of Prince Edward, Lunenburg, and Charlotte, they're joint zones. They may connect to one another, but each of them could have 3 non-contiguous areas themselves. And within the amendment manual, we do have some they're not graphs, but some pictures that show how some of that connection can happen to make sure that you're utilizing your boundaries the best you can. So as far as the map requirements, when you are making a boundary amendment, there are map requirements, and we do have 3 map requirements. The first map, of course, is indicating what the current boundary is, in addition to what your proposed deletions are and what your proposed additions are. Now, I do want to make note that we did decide to change the colors on this. So previously, the proposed deletions, I think, were one color, and the additions, I think the deletions may have been green, and the additions were red or something like that. We are making the deletions red and the additions green. Now, let me go ahead and just say that if you've already done your maps, and many of you have because we've had some meetings with you, that is fine. You do not need to change those. Just make sure that your key is correct to what you have done, okay? So I see a few nodding heads and say, okay, got it. So we made this change kind of a little bit late in the game. We're not going to punish anybody and make you make changes on that. As far as make sure you include in the map your major roads, your count, your town limits, especially if you've got towns within counties. We want to see where those are, key properties, special districts, anything of that nature. But of course, just making sure that those color codes are within that key. The second map that we do require is the modified enterprise zone boundary indicating the existing land use characteristics. So we need to know that privately held land, publicly held land, and also how much acreage is for each of those, or approximately. So on this map, we want the total zone acreage of the approximate number of acres devoted to each type of use. And we've listed those uses out, privately held land versus publicly held land. And then the third map is a map of the modified enterprise zone showing the boundaries of the zoning districts. So we want to know how it's zoned. Is it zoned maybe M1 or commercial, residential? But if the area is not zoned, then that map is not required. So definitely everyone must have map 1 and map 2. Map 3 depends on what your local zoning requirements are. And of course, one of the things, so we really have two types of amendments, the boundary amendments and the local incentive amendments. So in the local incentive amendments, you as a locality, you should regularly monitor those, the usage and effectiveness of the incentive. And consider amending them if they've not been used or as conditions in the zone change. So definitely taking a look at what's going on within the zone. And I know many of you are doing that to take consideration of what you may or may not want to change. Just to be clear, new incentives can be added to a package, and existing incentives may be adjusted or replaced. However, DHC will only approve deletion of local incentives if the proposed replacement is equal or superior to the incentives previously offered. So we want to make sure that you're not just taking things away because they're not being used, but you're looking at an evaluation aspect and saying, what could we replace it with that may be better utilized? And the package of local enterprise zone incentives is determined by the local governing body. So of course, you need to take that to your local governing body for approval and development. So your local economic development group may evaluate what's the best process and what you should be bringing up for those. But of course, we know that that goes to the local governing body through that whole public hearing process. And then just a little bit more information on incentive amendments. A locality you may set conditions it considers appropriate, providing there's no conflict with federal or state laws. So that is, and there's a lot more information about that in the amendment manual regarding those federal and state laws, allowed, not allowed, that type of thing. One thing we do want to emphasize is that business should not be required to qualify for state incentives to be eligible for the local incentives. So the local incentives are really meant for not only those businesses that may be able to go for those state incentives because they do meet those minimum thresholds, but definitely meet the need of businesses that do not qualify for state incentives. Okay. We do get asked quite a bit, what are other localities doing as far as their local incentives? And that list can be found in the appendices of the statewide annual report, which is on our enterprise zone administrators page and the enterprise zone page. So there you can take a look and it lists all of the localities and all of the incentives that they offer. And so that could provide you with, if you want to reach out to another local zone administrator and find out how they implement that particular incentive, that is where you would find that information. And of course, we've just listed some types of local incentives, so real property tax exemptions, fee waivers, like building permit fees, zoning, rezoning, local tax rebates, machinery and tools taxes, public improvement, sometimes with some business loans, some special rates for businesses within the zone, workforce services, B-POL exemption, and also take a look at what non-financial incentives you may have that you could offer. So as far as the incentive amendments go and the conditions of the incentive, you can place a period of time that the incentive is made available, and you can place on the period in time in which the businesses can qualify. So, and then eligibility criteria to receive incentives. So you want to put those parameters out for the incentive to not be restrictive enough that they can't apply for it, but you know what they're applying for. So it may be within, they have to do things within 5 years of opening, or that incentive may only be available for a certain amount of time. Sometimes the localities do have a cap on the amount of money available for that particular incentive. Guidelines for developing your local incentives, you want to use them to accomplish a plan. Consider your return on investment, and you can establish performance baselines for qualification. Make sure you're considering what your desired outcomes are, and of course, monitor those incentives regularly. So if you remember, the annual report, one of the things we ask for are those local incentives. So this goes back to just, we want to review again your requirements for submission. So as a reminder, all of your amendment application will be done in CAMS. There are two different applications. There's one for incentive amendments and there's one for boundary amendments. If you're doing both of them, which you are allowed to do at the same time, you would just be filling out two applications. However, all of these required documents can be utilized for both. Okay, so you can have your public hearings that encompass both the boundary and incentive amendments. So just making sure, just as a reminder, you do need to meet with DHCD staff before your public hearings to approve those incentives and or boundary additions or deletions. And this is for you. We don't want you to have to submit that in CAMS, have already had your public hearings, and then it comes back and says, well, you can't do that, or we don't see how you can do that. And then you have to go through that whole process again. When you're submitting your information to CAMS, all of this must be uploaded. So you have to upload your advertisement number 1 and advertisement number 2 with the proof of publication. You want to upload your public hearing information. So you would want to submit official minutes and any comments from that meeting. And also sometimes localities will accept comments prior to the public hearing. You want to make sure you've recorded those as well and submit those with the application. The resolution passed by the local governing body, certified and submitted with the application. The local assurance for the local governing body that is making the amendment. The joint zone amendment agreement, so that, remember, that's the one that is for the amending localities are in joint zones. And that's if you're doing the amendment and you're in a joint zone, you're going to have that as part of your submission application. If you're a single zone, you will not. Your maps, you remember we talked about the 3 different maps for the boundary amendment. 2 are the map 1 and map 2, and then map 3, depending on the zoning. And then also the incentive chart. So we do have a few, the maps, of course, are for the boundary amendment only. And then the incentive chart is for incentive amendments only. And those charts are available, or they actually, samples of them are in the amendment manual. And if you're doing incentive changes, you'll need to reach out to Kate or myself so that we can send you the Word documents for you to be able to utilize and complete based off of that incentive amendment. All right. So Kate, of course, Kate or Tori, did I miss anything? And then we, of course, want to open it up for questions. If you'd like to put any of your questions into the chat box, we'd be happy to answer those. We're going to tag team them. Okay.
Any questions? If you are planning to have an amendment this year, we ask that you try to meet with us. A lot of you we've already met with who are on this call, but if you are trying to get an amendment passed this year, we ask that you meet with us right away so that you have the time to go through the entire process and get everything properly approved. And we ask for those amendments and CAMs by November 1st so that we have time to work all of the approvals up the ladder here at DHCD. It will go through Mandy and myself, and then it goes up to our manager, Tori, and then up to the head of our division, Sarah Dunnigan. And then it also goes finally to the head of our agency, Brian Horn, who will look at the documents as well and approve. Any other questions? Mandy put a lot of really good, helpful links in the chat. And also, Brian Donahue had a great question. He asked when the easy renewal training session will be held. As a reminder, that session is scheduled for August 9th. If your locality is a locality that is required to renew this year, then you should have received an email from us letting you know that and about that renewal training. And of course, like all of our trainings, we will be recording it and we will get it out to you. We will also be getting this training out to folks who were unable to join today. Angie, I see your question. So the amendment due date is November 1st. So if you're planning to do an amendment this year, you want to get with us right away so that we can look through everything and approve you before you move forward at the local level with that public hearing and the advertisements for that. David Sachs.
Hey, thanks. So Kate, it sounds like from this that when we used to meet with you before we submitted, it was more of an informal meeting, but it sounds like what you've done is you've changed this a little bit. And so we're meeting with you and you're actually formally approving, what we're going forward with for our amendment. So in that case, since you're offering more of a formal approval, in terms of the maps that we're providing you for that meeting, I think next week we're meeting next week, and next week we're meeting with you. Do you want maps that are really of sort of submission quality for you to review? Or what do you
No,
think?
you don't have to have that for that. And that's a great question, David. For that initial meeting, we will sit down with you or get online with you when we're talking about others. And you can pull up your GIS, show us the properties that you want to add or delete. We'll kind of ask you why. We're happy to work with you or anyone about helping figure out if there are properties that could be taken out and areas that maybe need to be added into the zone, but you do not have to have those formal maps ready for that initial meeting. That initial meeting is showing us exactly what you plan to do, talking to us about it, talking to us about those local incentives and why you want to change them, what you plan to put in their place, etc. And then once we get in a good spot with that, that's when we'll give you the approval and you could submit the formal maps at the end of the process.
Okay. And another question has to do if we want to, if we're deleting property, and there's certain ones that are kind of no-brainers, that they're residential properties, that they're maybe even places of worship, government-owned properties. These kinds of properties that wouldn't be benefiting from the enterprise zone. But it's conceivable we'll be deleting some commercial properties. And so, and you don't have to answer this today, but maybe what we'll expect as a discussion of what you're looking for in terms of, demonstrating, I can't remember what terminology you used for deleting these properties, that it's not going to have a negative impact. So unless you have some sort of overall, sort of guidelines or advice to offer, but as an example, we may be deleting commercial, let's say we may be deleting 3 hotels that were constructed after the enterprise zone was designated, and they benefited from both local and state incentives. And so we're thinking, okay, we can take them out of the zone. They've received some benefit. Or maybe some others. But if you have do you have any sort of general guidelines or parameters that you're looking for in terms of demonstrating that?
So that's another good question. And the information you just provided is exactly all we would need. You explained that, they were added to the zone. They already received incentives. They're probably not going to be making any large changes that would qualify for incentives. And so therefore it makes sense to take them out. That's perfect. That's enough. I mean, it could even be something to the effect of, we have this small area of the zone that when the zone was first started was very heavy commercially, and there was a lot of new businesses opening there. And now that has really died down, and instead there's more of an attraction to this area that's not in the zone. And that's why we want to take away this acreage and add this acreage. Just that kind of explanation is perfect.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next up, I think we have Brian Fallon. You had some questions?
Yeah, thanks. Appreciate that. Just one thing real quick, just kind of a point of clarification. So in the manual, I see, so we're going to be looking similar to everyone else at some boundary adjustments and boundary amendments. I see that it says that the deletions are on a case-by-case basis, but then that first bullet point that references that 15% that it cannot exceed. So we're kind of in a situation where we have some pretty, and I think Kate and Tori both are aware of this. We've talked to them several times that we have some pretty large acreage that's more kind of conservation and recreation type areas that was included originally that we're going to remove and kind of reallocate that acreage. And that will definitely go above that 15%. So is that where that case by case basis comes in, or is that something we need to be having some other conversations about?
Good question. That's exactly a good example of a case by case basis, and that makes sense, and is something I can't speak for Tori. I think I probably could a little bit speak for Tori because we've worked together and I know what he would say, but I think that's something that we would definitely make an exception for, because it wouldn't make sense to keep that acreage in the zone if it's not going to be eligible for enterprise zones. Our biggest goal is to help you ensure that you can make as many businesses eligible for this grant so that y'all can use it up. And that we can get all of that money out the door, and it will help your businesses at the local level.
Okay, that's perfect.
The only thing I might add to that is that might be something that's in the code, that limiting factor to that. So if it is, we might be a little hamstrung with that. But we could work with you, kind of doing it on a yearly basis. Removing a portion of it that this year, and then 12 months later you can remove the additional anything that's above that 15%. So we'll have to kind of look at that maybe in that case and see if we have some limitations on that, and then can work with you to make sure that you do have those areas that are most important to the locality.
Okay. All right. That sounds good. Thank you. Of
course. Any other questions that we can answer?
Hey, this is Alicia Cundiff. I have a question. You mentioned that amendments, you're looking for them to be 10 acres in size. What if we were looking at less acreage than that for an amendment?
So you would have to have at least 10 for an amendment. I mean, you can have one property in your amendment that's less than 10 acres, but you would have to have another property with it so that the total amount of size that you're amending is more than 10 acres.
Okay, so we're not allowed to submit anything less than 10 total.
That's right.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure. Other questions? If not, a reminder that we have that renewal training on August 9th for those localities that will be renewing this year. We will be working on that statewide annual report, and I am sure that after we get that report completed, we will have we will go over that report and all of the data with you all. I appreciate you taking the time to be with us today. You know that you can reach myself or Mandy or Tori by email or by phone at any time, and we're happy to assist you. And we appreciate all of the hard work that you do in your localities supporting the Enterprise Zone program and marketing it for us. So thank you for that, and I hope you have a great rest of your week.
Thank you.